Hello everyone. So I just wanted to make a video going over a bunch of the different aspects of Bard into some detail, uh, starting with the song choice. We'll be going over some perks and skills, and then go into maybe some more detail on on some macro and micro stuff that you pay attention to on Bard. But So, starting with the songs, I think that if you're going solo, then I think your top four, top five are going to be Rousing Rhythms, obviously, is number one because it's going to help you play more songs. It's going to help you have more health, more agi, get you over that 15. If you look at the stats page here, help you get over the 15 for strength agi. The reason I'm already at 15 agi is because I'm playing the Alp skin, and then to get that will up so that you will have to rebuff less on yourself. So it's super useful. Beats of Alacrity, the 15 move speed, it shows 5, but it'll triple that if you play it perfect. So 15 move speed, which is 5%, is really going to help try to break some movement speed thresholds to outspeed opponents. You have Alacrity is very strong right now, it feels like. It says 8% action speed, but it's like closer to 20% when you play it perfectly, so it's a really big difference to your DPS and your just ability to swap your drums to your loot to your weapon and just generally play around and play around people easier. So for self buffs, those three I'd say are definitely your way to go. The damage gives you maybe like 10% damage, which could be good, but 20% speed is like twice as good as 10% damage, you know what I mean? In terms of if you're doing like DPS and stuff like that, and the speed just helps you with in more defensive ways as well, with being able to dodge stuff easier because you're spending less time doing actions that slow you down. So yeah, and then Shriek of Weakness would be the next go-to, mainly for PvP. Helps a little bit in PvE, but if you're solo, it's not really going to do too much for the PvP. It might help, like, maybe reduce the number of hits on someone by one, unless the fight goes super long. But obviously, it's super fast to pull off because it's only 3 notes, and you can skip the first half of it, so it only takes like 2 seconds maybe. But it's usually not worth spamming in the middle of a fight. Instead, if you're like throwing a drum or crossbowing or anything else, really, you're gonna probably get more value because if you hit them with that, it's going to do the same, if not more, than what Shriek of Weakness would do. So it's really only good to do Shriek and PvP solo, I would say, if you can't really do anything else to someone at that moment. Other than that, if you have the storyteller, which I would recommend starting out because then you can get 2 extra songs, really. Otherwise, you could run 5 spell and put them on your wheel because you don't want to run Unchained typically solo if you're just gearing up. So then you'd run 5 spell with Dissonance instead of Music Memory 2 starting out. But yeah, I would put personally, I would put the spells on the right wheel that you're using for self buffs, and on the left wheel, the stuff I'm using in combat, and I'll talk about that later. But the other 2 I would pick up solo would be Lament and Song of Silence, because if you start a fight solo with Lament, then 9 out of 10 times you're going to be able to outspeed the person that you debuff because you'll also have your move speed buff active, which means that you're giving yourself an extra 5% and you're reducing their move speed by like 7% or so, which means that you have just a flat 12% bonus move speed over them, not accounting for any gear, which is really hard for them to make up for, which means that if you need to play more songs and like continue debuffing and just like playing around them, it's going to be really hard for them to catch up to you. So obviously Lament's going to be less useful if it's a if you're pushing into somebody. But in terms of trying to just strafe around someone and just keep them from being able to like burst you down, Lament can be great to start out a fight, especially against like a barbarian or dual wield fighter, or anyone else, really, a rogue even. And then Song of Silence can just shut down a warlock or a wizard. And there's probably not as many warlocks as there used to be, but I mean, I'd usually just run it because even though it cancels out your songs, it's just a solid 6 seconds or so that you can either like reposition for free, and they can't really punish you unless they already have unless a warlock already has like Blow of Corruption up and he's just gonna push you anyway. But it allows you to just have some flexibility to like give yourself some breathing room instead of being held at an angle, and then they can reposition on you because they're just holding spells, and if you get in line of sight, then you're pretty much gonna die to any number of things. So that's what I'd recommend for a 20 spell memory priority, which works because of the +3 from Storyteller and the +3 from Rousing Rhythms. So if you keep those up, then you'll just have that without any gear. Other than that, you could take Unchained Harmony off if you buy some lockpicks, which if you go to the trade and you search for lockpicks, they're usually like, I was just checking today, they're like 40 to 50 gold per lockpick. So if you get out of like one good run, you should have plenty of money to be able to buy a couple of lockpicks, and then you could just drop Unchained. That works too. You can also use Unchained to open doors without you having to stop. You'll still have to slow down to play the song, but it would be faster. So if you're running a more evasive build, you could run Unchained Harmony anyway. But instead, you'd be freed up by 3 song memory. So you could take something else like Tranquility. Although solo, you could just take some bandages and stuff like that. I'd say Song of Shadow would be pretty good as well solo. If you don't have invis pots, you could buy invis pots and you don't have to take Song of Shadow. So Tranquility and Song of Shadow really just kind of take spots of gear that you don't have. So I would just recommend you could bring them, but the gear probably would just fill those spots anyway. Chaotic Discord Peacemaking you could bring, but solo they're not really that. Chaotic Discord's more useful solo than in team, just because the mobs will still attack your allies. But it's just too tight. Like, it takes too long to get a lot of value out of, and instead, if you could just go invisible and drop the aggro onto another player, then it works. And using Chaotic Discord to get the mobs to kill each other takes way longer than if you just pull out your rapier, cast Shriek on the enemy, and just go to town, because you'll be getting like 40% extra damage on mobs if you hit them with Shriek. So honestly, Chaotic Discord is fun, but it's just more of a liability than anything to bring with you. So instead of Unchained, you could bring something like Din, and you could use it to clear rogues or other invis barbarians if they're camping and stuff like that. You're not really using it as like a solid damage, other than if you're just trying to flush someone out of a spot and like keep them from camping like somewhere. But it can be really nice to go into a room playing Din and just know that it's free of people. So it can be really solid to bring that with you. You could also use Piercing Shrill, but since Din has way more uptime of when it's dealing damage, you can just do that. And Shrill 25 physical is not bad, especially if you can get like the Shriek of Weakness off. But yeah, again, you have better ways of dealing damage, so Shrill is kind of more of a backup and like kind of niche situation to use it, because you're only really going to get better value from doing anything else if you get someone through a wall with it, which is definitely doable. But it just, personally, I wouldn't do it. It's definitely fine to run if you want to run Piercing Shrill over Din. It's definitely fine, but I find the the invis checking capability of Din to just outvalue the damage from Shrill. So, yeah. Other than that, you could bring Ballad of Courage if you're not running the Unchained for your base, because, again, it's an extra 10% damage. So, I mean, you're already, if you're taking your starting Rapier, that's going to be 2 extra damage on your starting Rapier. Especially if you're running Rapier Mastery, and that'll only just get better. And so 2, on top of the Rapier Mastery, that'd be an extra 5 damage. It only goes up from there, so, like, it just stacks well with other damage perks that Bard has, like Reinforced Instruments and stuff like that. So, definitely not a bad call either. Even Warsong, plus Rapier Mastery, plus the Ballad of Courage, and you're going to be hitting pretty hard. It's going to be like an extra 8 or 9 damage just from perks and songs, so not a bad way to go there, but then you're got to be careful that you're not going to just try to get into DPS territory personally, where you're just trying to check to see if you out DPS the other guy. I personally don't find that to be super reliable. I mean, on any class, but definitely not on Bard, because I mean, you can build up armor, sure, but you're probably going to be less than like 20-30% most of the time on your resist, so you're going to be getting like probably, I'd say 2 to 4 shot depending on the opponent you're up against in their gear. So yeah, and you can't really build up as much gear as like a fighter or something like that. So you have to be very careful on who you're going to DPS check, especially if you don't know their gear or anything like that. I mean, that's just a rule of thumb for the game, um but yeah, if you're going for extra damage and you're just trying to get people down, or maybe go for Cave Troll or something like that, and you want to get some extra damage and clear it a little quicker, could definitely do that if you have lockpicks already. But the gear is just super good. And Unchained Harmony, I go based off of the info that Unchained Harmony does not work with luck. It's really hard to prove, personally, whether or not it actually works unless you have a large data sample, but you're kind of guaranteed to get the good gear from Lion's Heads and stuff like that anyway, so the luck doesn't matter too much for the locked chests, personally, because you're already guaranteed to get gear that you're going to care about. So lockpicks should increase your luck if you're bringing Wondrous Luck over Unchained on paper, but that's still just, I mean, you will know for a fact that the luck is working if you use lockpicks over Unchained, but Unchained will work either way, with or without the luck, because you're still going to be getting pretty good gear. I would not run Banshees solo, just because you already are running 2 to 3 debuffs, and spending half of your fight. Well, I mean, the thing is, Bard will be probably spending like half of their fight putting buffs and debuffs up, which is pretty normal for the class, I would say, depending on your playstyle. But Banshees really is mainly for if you have spellcasters on your team, in my opinion, and your main method of dealing damage to other players or mobs is through just magic damage. So, and the reason I'll get into that later, but that's more for team comps. But so yeah, if you have the 20 base at this at these spells, then you can start to get a little more flexible with the other ones you take. We already talked about how Din, you could bring like Tranquility or Song of Shadow, and those will fill in some of your gear or utility gaps maybe that you're missing. Otherwise, you can bring some other interesting utility ones, like you could bring Peacemaking. You can start to do some like especially if you're outspeeding people. You can use this to like pop a barbarian's abilities or something like that, and just, I don't know, mess around with people, get in their head. But it's not really that useful for combat or for PvP or PvE. So it's like just kind of a mental thing to use against people. Um, you could bring shield. It's gonna not do that much of a difference. Personally, if you're solo, it's 15 armor and magic resist, which is probably like a couple percent of your actual. It could be like anywhere from like 1.5 to like 3 or 4%, depending on how much armor you have. So it's not huge, but it's something. Um, I mean, you could bring Allegro or Accelerando solo if you have the space. But again, you're already running so many buffs and well, you won't really need to necessarily do Rousing Rhythms and Beats of Alacrity right before a fight, but you might want to rebuff yourself with Arya and Ballad of Courage because their duration is a lot shorter. So that's something that you have to consider. But if you're Arya, a Ballad, and then Allegro, after you like lament, shriek, I guess you could just only like shriek them or something like that, and then try to DPS them with Allegro, or you could Accelerando to maybe push into a room a little quicker. But it feels a little too situational solo because you're kind of telegraphing what you're doing beforehand, and you're basically spending the time that you're buffing giving the other person time to reposition and do other things that they need to do to combat you as well. And so the fact that you're only getting like solo, you're only getting 6 seconds of value out of something that takes like a few seconds to cast. It's not necessarily a consistent way to fight, because you're not gonna really have the time to do all of that necessarily. So uh, yeah, if you have one damage song, you don't need another. So this spot's more of just a flex, whatever you feel like. I've already kind of gone over. You definitely don't need clarity. That's not gonna help you solo. And yeah, so that's what I would go with solo. And then teams, we'll just drop some of these here. So if you're at, let's say, your base 13 or 14 here, you've got Rousing Rhythms, Beats, Aria, Shriek. I'd say you still want all 4 of these in groups for sure, because Aria's just like 20% action speed. That means it's free swap speed. It's like really good, even if you're just going like a full buff bard, because you're just going to be able to swap faster and keep up and swap to your crossbow and other stuff a little bit easier. Then you're gonna want Chorale Clarity if you have Wizard or Cleric. I'm sure that there's definitely some wizards that, or clerics that would just prefer campfires instead and don't really need the clarity. So that's just, talk with your team about that. But that'll take up 3 spell capacity if you are doing that, so that's definitely something to consider. You'd have to drop something like Unchained to take it. And again, you can just buy the lockpicks. I don't have any on this bard, but my other bard will have some lockpicks. Yeah, you can just bring in some lockpicks pretty cheap, considering how much how easy it is to get gold right now, it seems. But definitely way more value out of Accelerando and Allegro, but you're going to run into the issue. Now I'm going to go back to the other character because this is not at the base amount of knowledge, so it's not really going to show off too well what you can run at base. Song of Shadow does get more value in teams because it does cause all of your teammates to go invisible if you're standing still, which can be pretty useful, but it's kind of situational. So that's more of just like a team coordination thing. Everyone has to be on the same page for that to actually work properly. Din, again, for clearing stealth. If you have members on your team that are that already have tools that clear it, like Light Orb or Hydra or stuff like that, then you don't necessarily need Din, but it's definitely an option. You can also, again, if you have spellcasters on your team, you can run Banshees. And you still want to bring Shriek, usually, because it just allows you to deal so much more damage to the PvE with Shriek that it's really hard to say that you shouldn't take it, even if your team's not doing physical damage, but you're the only one that is. Because Shriek only reduces their armor, not their magic rating, which means that it's not going to affect spellcasters. But it's just such a huge difference. But Banshees, again, you're reducing their strength, which means you're reducing their max health. You're reducing their will, which means you're reducing their magic resist by 3 attribute points. Their move speed a little bit. It's just a little bit of a stat difference to maybe make the difference of 1 or 2 hits to not really 2 hits, but maybe like 1 hit for spellcasters on your team. Especially if you're playing more of a support role where you're not dealing a lot of direct damage to the other team. And I mean, it's not really gonna make Din deal much more damage effectively, because the base damage is so low on Din, but I mean, hey, you could do Banshee's Howl and Din them while your team does magic and just go full magic damage team. That's a route you could take. You won't want Song of Silence, usually, for the team that you're running on, because it will just silence everyone. You could coordinate it with a like Barbarian or Fighter, and make it so that you pop Silence right after they use their skills, so the skills will still be active, and they'll hear the song playing, so they should know if they've played with Bard enough on their team, when the Song of Silence is going to end, and they can pop their songs easily, or their skills easily before the songs are done. So again, Song of Silence requires some team coordination. Song of Shadow requires some team coordination. Harmonic Shield gets more value out of this out of a team situation. So if you're not running spellcasters, you could bring Harmonic. It does take like 4 or 5 seconds to cast without a lot of extra agi, so that's more time you're gonna have to be rebuffing, but it will potentially save your team if you are evenly matched with another team, for sure. The slow is a little worse in teams because it's harder. I mean, they're going to have more range options usually on the other team, and it can definitely stop their front line from pushing you, but the Bard's going to need to be near the front for that to work, so it's again, requires some team coordination for the Lament to really be useful, because you're going to need to be in position to actually hit the other team while not being exposed to their range damage if they have any. So, gonna have to coordinate for that one. I mean, yeah, that's the thing. These long-term buffs, super easy, require no coordination. Streak of Weakness, always useful. So, typically what you're gonna see is people are gonna be opting for the easier to use, more universal buffs and debuffs, and utility that you don't need any coordination with your team on. So you bring Unchained, it's like it's not like your team needs to be in a particular location to use Unchained most of the time. And I mean, Allegro and Accelerando are a little more team specific, but generally speaking, you're pretty safe to be bringing Accelerando and Allegro with the team, because it's gonna really help them if you're gonna be pushing into a room and you play Accelerando beforehand. if they're not like a rogue or a wizard that's trying to like get around their team so they won't be out of your song range, they're gonna get value out of it. So if you're buffing up right before you push into a room, then you're getting value out of it. So yeah, that's for sure. Those your easiest to use ones if you're just trying to fill up your stuff with songs that you really can't go wrong with. Then you're probably going to be bringing uh, probably all this. I mean, the self buffs for sure. You could bring Ballad of Courage. That even works. Because then you can just run a like battle bard with some team buffs. You're going to be spending a lot of time buffing and debuffing, so it's going to be hard to really get in your own damage if you really are just running the more universal stuff. So you might not end up using some of the songs to if you're spending all your time going like if you're trying to do everything, then it's going to be a problem. I'd say you kind of have to pick a lane if you want to get a lot of value out of it, because otherwise you're just going to be on the instruments the whole time and you're not going to be able to really get value out of ballad, which isn't the worst thing, but again, you're wasting time that you could be spending doing other things if you're just buffing up ballad but never using it. So you got to keep that in mind. Peacemaking, again, if you have spellcasters, you'll get more value out of peacemaking because it doesn't stop songs. Or sorry, well, I don't think it stops songs either. It doesn't stop songs or spells, basically skills. Anything that's on a skill slot, it doesn't stop. I mean, and that's how Song of Silence really works. In the other sense, is peacemaking is actions that like swinging weapons and stuff like that, but you can still use potions. Same with Song of Silence, you can still use potions, but you can't activate any of your skills, which includes any of your spells. And if you're in the middle of casting, if you haven't released, if the spell has not been cast yet, and like they're like channeling it or something, not channeling it, they're like charging up the spell, like a fireball or something, and you see their hand lighting up, and you hit them with silence, it'll just stop it. So yeah, that's how those work more specifically. Let me think if there's anything else here. Tranquility, again, if you have like a barbarian or a warlock. The Tranquility works well with a warlock because a warlock is getting a lot of the recoverable health back from their torture mastery, because warlocks are all gonna bring torture mastery. I don't see why they wouldn't. So yeah, every song, I would say, except for arguably Chaotic Discord, which you could get kind of memey with Chaotic Discord, has at least some situation where they're useful, which is definitely a pretty cool thing about Bard, but unfortunately, some of these more niche ones are definitely going to see a lot less use than maybe you would like, just because of how universal some of these other songs are. Like if you're running, I'd say if you're running a spell wheel like this with the physical damage build, where you've got basically all your self buffs and team buffs up, and then you've got Accelerando Allegro, you debuff them with Shriek, and then you have like Din for you're looking pretty good if you can get your like agility, especially if you can get your agility up. Then you're casting your songs faster, or you're playing your songs faster, however you word that. So you're able to get all your buffs and debuffs up, and then swap to your damage. You can't really go wrong with that. You could definitely, although it is going to be very expensive if you are running a build like this, is the only drawback. Again, you can take Unchained off, and you'll free up some. You will need less gear, but you just need a little bit of money to get the lockpick. So there's that. And then you can replace it with like Lament if you do have the knowledge, so you can reduce their move speed. And now I'll get to the point where I talk about putting all of the buffs on the right spell wheel and all of the more combat-oriented ones on the left spell wheel. The reason I do this is because when you are swapping your instruments, you're using 3 or 4, so you're using your index finger, but you need your index finger to use your right spell wheel unless you're doing some like weird grip or you change your keybinds. So depending on your keybinds, you could just use the right spell wheel. But if you're talking default keybinds, then if you want to swap weapons or swap instruments and you want to swap to your combat songs at the same time, then you're gonna want your ring finger and your index finger to do something, and you can use your middle finger to move at the same time. So like you can just basically get that extra half second to get your songs prepped so that you have less downtime. Yeah, that's pretty much the reason there is it's just faster if you can press 2 buttons at the same time. So I keep all my combat stuff on the left. Swap while I'm swapping. Swap my weapon or my instrument while I'm swapping my songs. And so it's definitely definitely takes a little getting used to, but that's how I would set it up. And yeah, that took a long time to talk about, so I guess I'll just stop with the songs for now. Because yeah, that took a while. Oh yeah, I didn't mention. I guess last notes is I didn't really go into too much detail. I mean, tranquility. It basically doubles the effectiveness of your of resting. Uh, so that's why you can still get value out of it. But um, and I mean, it's not bad. It still takes a little bit of time. If you stack it with a campfire, it's really fast. So there's that, and if you have like a gray or white campfire, it's not going to give you all of your health back. So this will just make you top up like that much quicker while you're in between combat scenarios. So that's the value of tranquility. Clarity, apparently you can spam clarity and it slightly speeds up the speed at which you get your spells back. But I imagine they'll probably change that. That seems a little cheesy, but definitely, it's got to take advantage of everything you can because you got to assume your opponents are going to, in a sense, right? Unless it's like super exploity. But yeah, so overall, Bard has a lot of options, and you're definitely limited at first, but not necessarily too much, I would say. Because, especially if you hit level 5, and I mean, I think when I was leveling this Bard recently, and I think I was taking Rapier Mastery over Storyteller. So if you're only running 17, then you're looking at probably Shriek and not Lament, which is probably fine, because you're definitely going to want Unchained. And the reason, I mean, I have Unchained on like the combat wheel, because I will use it like if I'm running away from someone and I really need to quickly swap to my flute and play Unchained to open a door. But if you're not using it like that, then you can easily put it on the right. So again, that's just a preference thing. I'm explaining it so that people can use that knowledge to kind of their advantage and hopefully expand on it and make Bard better in the process. So yeah, if you're gonna have 17 if you account for Rousing Rhythms, and you're gonna be able to easily fit still 4 or 5 songs on one skill, and then you run Dissonance on the other. Encore's useless. I won't talk about the perks right now. It's kind of quick. Sure, I'll do it real quick. Charismatic Performance is a must, because, I mean, I've already touched on some of the perks. You just skip so much time for the songs. It's just like getting your songs out quicker is just way too important. I've got another video that talks about how many notes you can skip for each song, and preferably when you want to do the skips. It's like just a super quick, like just informative one, but I can definitely talk more in detail about each of those at another point. But so you definitely want charismatic performance. I prefer rapier just because of the speed. I like to be faster, and I like to not trade with people. I prefer to get hits in and not receive damage in return. So that's why I go for rapier mastery. I don't really have a big burst mentality. Is another reason, which I wouldn't say it's wrong to have a burst mentality, but if you're going to, then you're gonna need definitely a harder hitting weapon like a falchion, and then you would take maybe War Song or something else instead. Although, I don't know, War Song's alright, but Storyteller again to help you get to that 20 song memory so that you can grab, like, I would be able to grab 2 extra debuffs that cost 2 if I take that. So that's pretty huge. Otherwise, if I don't want to go for more debuffs, I can take more damage, or if Rogue meta pops off again or something like that, then you can bring Din. So yeah, you've got options. And then Wanderer's Luck, I would, if I'm going for like a full PvP one, then obviously you don't need Wanderer's Luck to loot other players, and you could bring something like War Song or even like Superior Dexterity or Dancing Feet. I'd say you only really need Superior Dexterity if you're swapping to a crossbow. If you have a crossbow, then Superior Dexterity feels really good, but otherwise you swap fast enough between your stuff that you don't really need it. But just swapping to your crossbow quickly could be like reason enough to take it, so it's up to you. The 10 move speed from Dancing Feet is mainly for if you're going for like a reinforced instruments build, which you wouldn't really want Rapier Mastery for. You'd replace Rapier Mastery with like reinforced, and then you'd run Dancing Feet, because if you're dealing damage with your instruments, you're going to have your instruments out, which means you're going to get the move speed for free. So that's just a given. And ideally you wouldn't need Storyteller, and you could still bring Wondrous Luck, but then you can, I mean, I've heard, I personally don't run a reinforced instrument build that much. I ran it once, and I like 2-shot a super geared rogue with my loot, but like, you're still gonna, if someone can like outrange you like a warlock, and they can just like keep you from like getting close, and you're throwing drums but they're just line of sighting, you can still easily get outplayed. But it's definitely an option if you just want to have some fun and smash some heads with the loot and stuff like that. You don't really need Spirit X, I would say, for a Reinforced Instruments build, because Aria of Alacrity is pretty much enough on its own for you to be fine. So there's that. Jolly Time, not as good as it used to be, just because it's like 8 gold now for Grey Ale. It used to be 1, so you'd get like 10 healing for 2 gold and stuff like that. So, I mean, if you're rich, which it's a lot easier to get money now, you can definitely easily run Jolly Time. It's just not like a cheaper alternative to healing. It's just now an alternate way to heal regular health pretty quickly, which still has value. It's just not nearly as broken. It kind of deserved the nerf that it got, to be honest. It was like really strong if you were building around it, because you just could not die. Lore Mastery, probably don't need it for the most part, because it's not going to help you in combat. It's going to help you out, like, it's mainly going to help you outside of combat. And if you're like me and you're running Unchanged to open doors quickly, then you don't need Lore Mastery, because you have a song covered for that already, and it's all multi-purpose. It'll open the locked stuff, so like you don't need Lore Mastery. Maybe if you're going mining, that's like the one thing. But I heard that there might be some bug with it where it doesn't affect mining, but I can't recall. I think I tested it one time, but it was a while ago, so it could have changed. Melodic protection, you could bring. I mean, it is 15% damage reduction while you're playing a song if you're going a full support bard. I personally feel like I don't have enough slots to bring it, especially since Storyteller feels way more mandatory now after the bard changes than before. So I have 2 slots already filled up with perks that I care about. And I run Rapier, so it's already taken up by Rapier Mastery, because that's just going to help clear PvE. But if you're going full support bard, you don't really need more damage, right? But you might want Warsong to help your rest of your team's damage. Although it's weapon damage if you're running spellcasters, then again, you don't get value out of Warsong or Rapier Mastery. But you're going to want Dancing Feet. So it's like melodic protection is so low on the priority. But if you're going PvP with like mainly spellcasters, you don't need the extra Warsong damage. You don't need Wonders Luck because you're going PvP. You're not running really crossbow that you're using consistently. You can still get away with the crossbow without superior dex. Then there's not really an alternative, and you can run melodic protection. So there's definitely a situation where you could use it, but again, up to your team, up to your playstyle. Very, very interesting if you are in that, because I haven't personally had to use it, but definitely can see it work. I think that pretty much covers everything, right? Yeah, the 50% weapon damage, by the way, on instruments is only for the throwing the drums, swinging the lute, blocking with the flute. Parry riposting with the flute. But you never want to parry. I mean, okay, so there was a video that came out recently talking about the impact of different weapons, and if you can stuff an axe or something, like if you can parry the hilt of an axe, then you're fine. But the issue is if you try to parry just like a raw, like full impact axe attack from a barbarian with crush, that attack is just gonna go straight through your flute and you're gonna take damage. So it is hard to pull off a flute parry riposte and like actually have it be viable. So just keep that in mind, but you're gonna get a lot of value out of just using it with your drums and your lute, just because, I mean, the base damage is kind of low, but you can get some drums for pretty cheap that do a bit more. You go from 16 to 23 just from a green. If you can get a blue, it's like 24, 25 you're looking at. Also, if you're going to be getting better quality loots, that is going to make the movement speed penalty a little bit better, although it's really, I think it's like white or greens reduces the movement speed penalty by 1. So it's not going to be that big of a difference on a loot. It's mainly going to be the weapon damage. But something like a drum, base movement speed penalty is 30. You get a white drum that's 28. You go up in rarity, it just goes down and down and down. Flute is not affected move speed wise by rarity, just the damage. So really for a flute, the rarity is just going to give you the chances for rolls that are going to do that for you. So there's no need to inherently go for a better rarity on a flute, but you could maybe get some value out of a lute, drum, or a lyre, because base move speed penalty is 18, and just a gray is already minus 17, and it does scale pretty well with rarity, the move speed penalty reduction. So something to keep an eye on. It could definitely make you feel that little bit faster, especially when you're stacking it with other movement speed. Yeah, I feel like there's definitely a lot of options for building. I personally run heavy utility bard, where I prefer to just kind of stick in mid-range, kind of poking and fire my crossbow. I just got some oil lanterns and other stuff like that on backup, just to deal with options. I like to just be able to deal with all the different situations that I might run into. So I bring gear, probably more than I need to, but again, I bring the Invis pots. That means I don't need Song of Shadow. I can bring lockpicks, basically, I bring gear, and I can just really play my class to its fullest potential. And really, you come across like pretty good instruments pretty easily nowadays, so it's not even like +4 additional physical damage drum. I'm not even running a reinforced instrument build, but you might still get value out of that, just having one on you, because it's 30 damage without any, even without it. So again, covering your bases. But usually, if I fire a crossbow and I need to reload, I'll pull out some like Francisca X's, and then chuck those. I will usually not checking my drum just because I don't trust that they won't pick it up. I mean, sure, you could say, oh, I've thrown drums at people and they never pick them up because they can't use it, but like, I mean, if you know what I mean, if you're playing against people and they know how to counter a bard, then I would kind of be scared of throwing a drum at them, especially if it's your only drum. So yeah, some quick notes about where I put my gear on my equipment slots is I'll put my flute on the left in slot 2, and my torch in slot 3, and I'll leave slot 1 open. And I leave slot 1 open because when I right click, it will autofill the top left slot. And if I have something in the slot and I need to put something else and I right click, it will autofill over the equipment that I already have there. So I can just fill that first slot without moving around anything else on my utility bar. So I find it really valuable to be able to do that consistently and not have to think about it. I keep the flute on the left by itself next to the torch because I like to be able to get my flute out quickly whenever I need to play Shriek. It's possible that I'm getting to the point where I might change it up and put the lute on the left. I just have the muscle memory down from running Shriek so long. Just because I usually will try to slow enemies before I Shriek them. So, because it just makes it easier for me to get my buffs off, as I've talked about. I put the drum, then the lyre, then the lute, because the drum, you're going to want to do those buffs first, because you're going to get the rousing, which is going to give you the will, and the will is going to give you the buff duration, which is going to make all of your other buffs, and also the resourcefulness, make all of your other buffs last longer. So you play rousing first, and maybe you play it again if you just want to give everyone that slight duration bump on rousing, but it's not necessary the first time. You can always, when you reapply the buffs before they expire, you'll get the extended duration. Then the lyre for the ballad or harmonic, which honestly, I've been dropping the lyre on my starter build because I haven't had ballad or harmonic anymore on my starter build. So yeah, so it's just been drum lute on the right, no lyre, and then flute torch on the left. So yeah, that's something to consider, is you might not even need a lyre, and people might argue the lute, but I find that aria is just better than ballad. If that's the case and you run Ballad of Courage, then you could drop the lute, but I also run Lament. So yeah. So that's why I put that stuff. I put the crossbow or my ranged weapon in slot 1. I keep my melee weapon in slot 2. Reason for this is, let's say I have a second crossbow or some other, like let's say I fire my crossbow and I want to swap to a short bow, just because you have a lot of utility that you can use as bard. So if you have a short bow and you have your crossbow and you don't want to reload it and you need to have something quick that you can fire, then you can, let's say, fire your crossbow, right click, and you don't need to drag. It's just that extra less motion that you have to do, just a simple button, and you have another weapon that you can use ready to go. And you're probably not going to be swapping your melee weapons as much. If anything, you'll be swapping your offhand on your weapon from like a lantern to a hand crossbow or something like that. In that case, you need to drag anyway. So right-clicking is not really going to help you. So yeah, if you just think about, if I right-click, what's that going to do? Because then you can just just a tiny bit of time here and there, and just do things slightly quicker and just get that little bit of an edge over your opponent by just using the keybinds and other stuff to your advantage. So yeah, there's one last note on that. Alright, I'm done thinking of one more thing. I'm just gonna end it here, and maybe I can make a follow-up video for any of the stuff that I missed, because there's definitely some more little details here and there, but I knew that there was a lot of little stuff that I just wanted to talk about in terms of just the pre-round lobby, just setting up Bard. There's a lot to think about and consider, because he is definitely a character that can fill in a lot of the gaps that your team has, and you might have to play completely differently depending on who you're playing with or how you feel like playing. So something to consider, which makes him really flexible, and one of the reasons why I like playing Bard quite a bit. So I'll end it here. If you got all the way to the end, thanks for hearing me out. Feel free, if I got anything wrong, if there's any other information that you think would be important, then comment away. Maybe streaming on occasion. Link that below. But yeah, thanks. Have a good one.